We know during the pandemic there have been extraordinary stresses on all of us that child care providers have been integral to help families. But child care providers are unsung heroes every day.
Well, you were hearing from Washington Governor Jay Inslee there back in May of this year, celebrating Child Care Provider Awareness Day. As we start the school year this fall and emerge from the pandemic, child care is one of the critical issues Seattle and our state is dealing with. We're going to dive into that and a lot more on this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. Brian Callen in with you. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And joining me, I have a special guest today, and that is Dr. Stephan Blanford. He is the Executive Director of the Children's Alliance here in Seattle. Stephan, good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well, Brian. It's good to see you as well.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, if you had to write that essay at the start of the school year, what did I do over my summer vacation? What would it be?
What I did over my summer vacation was just prepare for my senior in high school, graduating, and then getting ready for university next year.
Wow. Okay, that's a big one. We're going to have to talk about that one offline so you can give me some tips because I'm in that boat too. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining me, Stephan. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Please support them, other small businesses too. Thanks also to our show patrons. If you want to join them, support local journalism. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. We also thank Converge Media. Converge airs the video version of the podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. We're going to get started with right here, right now. So, Stephan, I connected with you at a Children's Alliance event this past summer here, and a few things struck me in looking at what you do. One, you're still working as hard as ever when it comes to education, early learning, racial equity. And two, you took a job with the Children's Alliance in the middle of a pandemic. What's going on? Let me know about that job, the work you do, and the mission of Children's Alliance.
Well, you are exactly right. It's the strangest thing in the world to start working for an organization where you're not in the same room as the people that hired you.
Right.
Or you start working and you're working with all these people that are hardworking, but you're never actually in physical space with them. It's been a year unlike any other year, just with the pandemic. But the reality is kids need our advocacy more than ever. So it's an exciting opportunity to try to make a difference.
And let me know a little bit about what the Children's Alliance is all about. You mentioned advocacy. What does that really mean? What does the Children's Alliance do?
So we've been around for more than 30 years now. We do advocacy for children. We recognize that in the Washington State Legislature, there are many legislators who care very deeply about kids, others not as much. And so we try to promote policies that work to the benefit of all kids, and specifically for kids of color that are usually furthest away from their potential. And I frequently tell the joke that when I was in Seattle Public Schools, I went from 53,000 kids to now I advocate for 1.6 million kids around the state.
Yeah,
and that's pretty exciting.
Statewide position. That's a great way to look at it. Well, I want to talk about some of this advocacy work that you've been doing, and specifically the Fair Start for Kids Act that I talked about at the start of the show here. The governor was talking about it. Children's Alliance helped work on this legislation, which aims at solving the child care crisis in Washington state. And I'm going to give folks some backgrounds here, Stephan, in terms of why this is a crisis. We have more than 500,000 kids in our state who do not have access to licensed child care. On top of that, the Economic Policy Institute says in 2019, our state ranked 9th among the least affordable states in the nation for infant care, with costs requiring 20% of median family incomes. I'm just throwing out a few of the stats here. People can't afford childcare and get to work. Those disruptions cost our state more than $2 billion a year. So, Stephan, I'm looking at this. You know more than I do that this is a multi-tiered problem. Not having proper childcare affects families, affects the economy, affects our education system too. All these issues very much laid bare during the pandemic. How do you understand the child care crisis, and what is Fair Start for Kids going to do to try to solve it?
So the first part of that, or the second part of that, I would say that child care is essential both to the economy, to the recovery of the economy. As we have discovered, if you don't have a robust child care sector, you can't get people back to work.
Yep.
For me, I think about, my career has been dedicated to resolving opportunity gaps that are in place. And I know that if you don't have good childcare, then kids start behind. And I know from my K-12 experience, they stay behind by and large.
Yeah.
There are the exceptions to the rule, but they prove the rule.
Yeah.
And so we really need to have a good childcare in Washington State in order to get to the outcomes that we're expecting society and address some of the inequities that are so prevalent in our society right now. So the work of Fair Start for Kids is all about that. It's a recognition that there was somewhere around 46% of providers that said they would close their doors this time last year. And that would have a devastating impact. We already have childcare deserts, places where there's no childcare access or the quality is so poor that you're doing a disservice to the kids.
Yeah, and that existed before the pandemic even too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is an opportunity for us to really reinvest in ways to ensure that there's robust childcare in every corner of the state, which then has this ripple effect over time for kids and their families and their communities over a long period of time.
Right. So just getting into some of the details of it, if we can look at it at a high level, Stephan, we're talking about making some of these capital investments to expand the childcare that's out there already, maybe add some new facilities here. We're talking about reducing copays, things of that nature. Can you talk about some of the details of this act and what it's going to be able to do for families?
You got most of it right there.
Okay.
There is a large segment of the population right now that doesn't qualify for subsidies.
Right.
Childcare is very expensive. And this would provide additional support to those families that we would index their incomes based on a different measure than we have in the past that will allow more families, more middle income working class families to actually access childcare. And that's very exciting. Another piece of it is we have to improve the quality of childcare and work with providers. And so there's a big piece in there around providing support to providers. The reality is, if you are a child care provider in Washington State, we're not paying you enough to cover your costs.
Right.
And so there's got to be a way to incentivize more people coming into the sector and to pay people appropriately for being in the sector. And then there's lots of other small tweaks, but we haven't addressed that cost situation as well as we should have, and raising the incomes for providers so that it is something that they are not making a sacrifice in order to do this, but they're actually making enough to be able to take care of their families. Is a big piece.
It's a huge piece of it, and there's so many different moving parts here, as you know, with this. When you talk about these different child care facilities that have had to close down, and some of them have closed down permanently, I know over the past year here, do you feel that we're going to be in a good spot as a state when September arrives, when more families will probably need this help? I know that they need this help year round, but when we start going in the months ahead, when you try to implement this act, I guess is what I'm saying here. When you try to implement this, what's that going to look like? Do you have enough time to ramp up these facilities before the fall, or what do you think?
Well, it's hard to know. You know, in some places in Seattle, it's going to be better than it's going to be in a small town in Eastern Washington that had one child care provider that has closed their doors. Right. So people in that city are now scrambling to find child care anywhere that they can and relying on family, friends, and neighbors. You know, in some cases, and we know that women have historically, and in particularly during the pandemic, have quit their jobs or lost their jobs in order to stay home and take care of kids. And so this has a multi-layer impact that we are trying to make for kids.
Got it. And in looking at this, I wanted to make sure I pulled out one piece of this financial piece here. Part of the funding for this program in the future depends on the capital gains tax that our legislature pushed through this session. It's a really hot topic. You know this. I know this too. This is an issue that's already getting challenged in court. How concerned are you about this piece of funding being so open to that political debate? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. I was wondering if that was going to come up as a topic. It surely is a investment that the legislature made to say that people who are making just outlandish profits, right, should take some portion of those and put them towards childcare, towards this essential service that we don't have funding for otherwise. In the first year, funds from the stimulus, the federal stimulus, will be funding it. But in the future, if we don't have a capital gains tax, we need to have something that will provide a revenue stream.
Yeah.
It's my belief that the capital gains tax will pass constitutional muster,
Hmm.
that as it heads towards an eventual Supreme Court
Yeah.
decision, that
Yeah.
eventually it will be judged as something that is acceptable.
Yeah.
But if not, we've got to strategize what is the next move in order to ensure that there's a revenue stream
Right.
in order to make these investments.
Right. Which almost makes rolling this program out in the months ahead here critical, just to prove the case, I guess, is kind of
That's
where I'm going
exactly
with that.
right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. To prove the need,
Hmm.
Children's Alliance is going to be very involved in the implementation of it.
Yeah.
As you well know, legislator votes yes, the legislature
Hmm.
approves the thing, and the legislator that had the legislative intent that it should help families, that it should, sometimes that gets lost as it moves from the legislature to the administrative arms,
Yeah.
administrative agencies. And so we have a key role to play in ensuring that that legislative intent actually informs. And so what that means is that families that didn't realize that they are now eligible for subsidies, we have to go out and do active outreach to those families to make
Okay.
sure that they know, so that they can take advantage of this service that is now available.
And that's a big piece of it. I think just the education of the general public about this, because I know when my wife and I started getting involved in the childcare world, gosh, I'm looking at 14 some odd years ago now. My kids are definitely older. This was something that was such a challenge for us, and it
Yeah,
was basically another mortgage we were paying. And
yeah,
we're doing a lot better than a lot of people. I have to face up to that, but gosh, this was something that was such a financial burden on us, and I know it is on other families too. And I guess you're trying to have that conversation with different families, because this really affects everybody. It's not just
right,
people who are not that well off, people who are a lot of different people you're trying to reach
right,
out to here, it sounds
right.
like.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about your experience with childcare. I was in college, getting my doctorate at the
Yeah.
same time that we were getting childcare, and we had that
Oh boy.
same debate about, wow, I'm spending more money on childcare than by a lot, by
Right.
a multiple,
Yeah. Yeah.
and recognizing that, but also in particularly in communities of color,
Yes.
communities that have not been well served, they
Yeah.
don't know that those subsidies are available now. And so we
Yeah.
have to do active outreach. And,
Yeah.
for many communities, if you go in and you say, I work for the
Yeah.
government and I
Right.
want to
Watch out.
give you
Hmm.
something, the
Yeah.
door gets closed. And so
Yeah.
we need to figure out new ways to do outreach.
I know I do so much work with the city of Seattle and their different programs. It's an issue for every different agency
Mhm.
that tries to do this. Is it trying to make connections with these different trusted advisors within those
Yes,
communities? Or
indeed.
tell me what this might look like on the ground. I know you've been thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, I think you have gotten it. It is a recognition that instead of some governmental official
Hmm.
walking into a community and saying, we've got this free service,
Yeah.
you use trusted advisors, you
Yeah.
use people that are well known in the community. In many cases, you just identify community leaders
Yeah.
and say, will you share this information? Can we
Yeah.
incentivize you to share this
Right.
information, get it
Right.
out into the community?
Right, right. It's going to have to start with them. So I guess
Right.
this is just I'm just kind of looking at the plan the next couple months ahead as we wrap up this topic, Stefan. I think this is partly making sure you're getting out in the community and also holding the legislature's feet to the fire here. How do you look at the game plan, I guess, over the next couple months when it comes to implementing this?
So we talked a little bit about making sure that we recognize that there's demand out there.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we want to get people to actually enroll in the programs that are provided, so we can demonstrate their area's need. We have to defend the capital gains tax to
Hmm.
the nth degree to
Yeah.
make sure that there is a revenue stream to do this in perpetuity. We
Hmm.
can't do it for 1 year and then have all the programs go away. That
Right.
would be doing a disservice to children and families if we do
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And then recognizing that Fair Start for Kids is a tremendous investment. I get phone calls all the time now
Hmm.
from other states where they're
Right.
saying, how did you do what you have done?
Yeah.
But we recognize that it's not all that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Workers are still uncompensated in the sector.
Hmm.
There's still a lot of tenuousness in their ability to project out and
Hmm.
to build structures that
Yeah.
will allow for quality childcare to actually take place And so there's a lot of work that we still have to do, and we're going to be engaged in that going forward.
All right. Thank you for breaking all that down with me, Stephan. Up
My
next, we're going to
pleasure.
talk about Stephan's work as a Seattle school board director not too many years ago. That's ahead on Now Hear This. Well, Stephan, I'm going to play a soundbite from a discussion that you and I had about 6 years ago when you were on the Seattle School Board. You joined me on City Inside Out on the Seattle channel, and you were talking about the Seattle preschool program, which was just getting started at that time in 2015. Here's what you were saying about the potential of the SPP, how it could help with student achievement as kids move from preschool into the K through 12 system. Let's listen.
This is a wonderful opportunity, particularly to address our achievement and opportunity gaps at K-12. Kids who are arriving at the K-12 door, or when they arrive in kindergarten, they're ready to go. And that's probably our most potent strategy in addressing our achievement and opportunity gaps.
Well, Stephan, you can't say that you haven't stayed on message. This is something you've been saying then. You're saying it now. I really wanted to focus on Seattle, though, and get your take on how we're doing with early learning. This is an issue you've been passionate about for many years, certainly when you served on the school board from 2013 to 2017. How much progress do you think Seattle schools have made when it comes to early learning, working on these achievement gaps here? I know this is another big question with some impacts from the pandemic, of course, but some thoughts on this.
Yeah, there was a study that came out, a national study that came out recently, I think before the pandemic, but not much before the pandemic, that said that Seattle public schools, or Seattle, the city of Seattle, had one of the best municipal childcare systems in the nation. They ranked it as high as you could rank it. The only qualm about that ranking was that we weren't serving as many kids as there were out in there. So there was demonstrated need that wasn't being met.
Right.
And as I was reading the report, I was thinking to myself, that was such a contentious issue on the school board while I was serving.
Yes.
And I wish that the people who were in such strong opposition could have read the report, because it said that we have implemented with fidelity that kids are being served, that low-income kids and kids of color are prioritized, and that it was making a difference in our opportunity gaps. And I know that that's a long-term process, that you won't see the results of that, but I know that the important investment had been made. So I was really proud to have a role to play in that.
Absolutely. And I did want to look forward. I know we're still going to be seeing these impacts from this investment of the SPP for several years, but you, of course, have seen some of these achievement gaps that have persisted in the Seattle School District, certainly over the past several years. Again, I know the pandemic has had an effect on this as well, but your thoughts about those gaps and the persistency of them, and just some of the challenges, because I know the school board now is dealing with some of the same challenges that you were dealing with 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, so I've been off the board for 4 years now, and recognize fully that the opportunity gaps that Seattle Public Schools experiences in large measure start in the preschool years. And so I was really proud that we were able to make that investment, and hope that if they stay true to it, that you will start to see the benefit in 4th grade, in 8th grade, in 12th grade. There's ample academic research to show that one of the most significant indicators of your opportunity gap is how much childcare and the quality of childcare at the early years. Areas that have really robust childcare have much smaller gaps. And in Seattle, Washington, we should have very small gaps, because we're an affluent community by and large, right? And we haven't had a history of discrimination in the way that you see in some of those states in the South and wherever else. And so it was, to me, it was unacceptable that we had gaps as large as we did. While I was serving, we had the 5th largest opportunity gap in the nation of any district in the nation. And you would think, given the criteria that you would look at, you would think that Seattle would not have that be the case. And so that was something that I tried to work on, tried to illuminate and make people realize that that was the case, and to start to work on it. And it's ongoing work. The current school board, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about their performance, and I'll share some thoughts.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I took a few steps back from that, but thanks for bringing up that piece. I just look at a Seattle school district that is, again, in a bit of a state of flux, to be honest. We've got a new superintendent that is coming in. Superintendent Denise Juneau quit before her term was up. The NAACP in the Seattle area, others too, said they had no confidence in her in terms of tackling issues of racial equity, other concerns too. I know the interim superintendent, Dr. Brent Jones, he says he's listening. He's going to open up all our schools this fall. He's working on racial equity, discipline, definitely has a full plate there. I'm thinking of a couple questions here. What should our expectations be for Dr. Jones this fall? And maybe a related question, why is it so difficult to keep our superintendent on the job in Seattle?
I have great hope for Dr. Jones. He's a dear friend of mine, and I'm hoping that he can set a stage for great progress. Yeah. I know that superintendents, particularly interim superintendents that are going to be there for 1 year, do not have a huge amount of authority inside of the organization. They're not going to be able to make a right-hand turn and go in a different direction. Yeah. But he can set the stage for the next superintendent to come in and make really good progress. Yeah. I'm struggling with all the issues that you raised. Losing Superintendent Juneau so soon in her term, but more than anything else, just the constant churn of superintendents that we have seen. Yeah, I've been studying Seattle Public Schools since John Stanford came on, and the number of superintendents that we've had is far higher than most urban districts. Yeah. And that is, I think it has a lot to do with the board, and it has a lot to do with community groups that are advocating, in some cases with limited understanding. I know from my experience as a school board director, people would come in, they would yell about their particular issue, and they would leave. Yeah. And you wanted them to stay engaged, because that's how you become knowledgeable enough to actually have an informed voice, rather than just one that is polarized and just going from one direction to the other. And that's one of the things that Seattle Public Schools struggles with.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And while we're talking about it, let's talk about the school board, because it's certainly going through some churn itself. Had a board member resign in early 2021. Eden Mack left her District 4 position. And she said this at the time. I pulled out one quote I'd like for you to respond to here. She said, "Despite all our best efforts, we have systemic failings in keeping students safe while in our care, overcrowded classes, and a structural budget deficit." I'm trying to think about this, how our school board takes a role here and digs out from this avalanche of problems, again, exacerbated by COVID here, but really some major structural issues that have existed for years. So let's talk about the school board.
Yeah, I would say that everything that she said is true. I struggled that she should have known going into it that those issues were there. And she added to the chaos, in departing 3 years into a 4-year term, just adds to the chaos. Someone has to replace her. That person has to get up to speed. And I know from my personal experience, it takes a year or two to even recognize how to make change inside of the district. I know that districts that have cohesive school boards actually make progress, work well with the superintendent, they make progress. Get into fights with the superintendent, not so much. I know from my own personal experience that the professionals are the district administrators, and that the school board should be working well with them and not in constant conflict with them. And that's one of the things that I think our district struggles with. But if I could go one point further, I have made the argument that ultimately we elect school board directors. Yes. And so we as a community, it is very easy to complain about the school board and the school district, but what is our responsibility to put forward people who are willing to serve? What's our responsibility to change the dynamics so that people are willing to serve? I've argued, it is a thankless job. It can consume 30 to 40 hours a week, and you don't get paid for it. You get paid a small amount, so small that I didn't even fill out all the paperwork that was necessary to get the funding for it. And so what is our responsibility as a community if we want this $1 billion+ enterprise to serve the kids and families in this city? I think we have to do some structural reform. We have to be very serious about it. But most importantly, I think those of us who care about Seattle Public Schools need to be invested in it. And that means going to a school board meeting, engaging with your school board directors, thinking about other people's kids.
Yes.
Too frequently, we get into this battle where parents would come to me and they didn't care about the kids in other parts of the district. They didn't even care about the kids in their school. They only cared about their kid and the kids that looked like their kid.
Right.
And I think that's one of the dynamics that is most dangerous to a school district when you have a whole group of people who say, if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to leave the district and I'm going to go somewhere else. And you have another group of parents who say, if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to burn the place down, basically. I'm going to get school board directors fired. I'm going to get rid of superintendents. All of that works to the harm of the 52,000 kids that we're trying to serve.
Yeah, and there are a ton of them there. I think about that and the different, it can be school versus school. It can be classroom versus classroom within a school sometimes. And I just try to look at those different efforts, because I know you've tried to juggle these different pieces together for many, many years here. What are some ideas that you might have about that? Is it, let's pay our school board directors more? Is that the answer? Do you want to make that more of a professional level job? Or what's your thought? Do you have any thoughts about that?
So that one comes up frequently, the idea of compensating school board directors. And, I think politically it's something we need to work on, because you can't, with the dysfunction of the school board, say, oh, let's pay them and then they'll do better.
Tough sell. Yeah.
Right. It's a hard sell. But I think it's something that eventually we have to work towards in order to ensure that you're getting the quality that you need. The reality is we have this romantic notion that some person who may have a kid in Seattle Public Schools is equipped to run a billion-dollar institution that employs 6,000 people, that is dealing with the complexity of. I think we need to be serious about the qualifications of school board directors and not just rely on anyone who's willing to take the job, because what we get in too many cases, not all, but in too many cases, is people that have an axe to grind about one issue. And then they discover very quickly, oh, I have to deal with labor, I have to deal with food, transportation, kids. We have to have conversations about education and what's best for kids, right? And when you have all of that cycling with a person who's not qualified to do the work, then that's a setup for failure. And we've seen that over and over and over again.
Wow. Any final thoughts? I wanted to make sure I wrapped up this topic and asked you about it. Any final thoughts for the school board going forward? They have a lot of things they need to tackle here in September. I know they're listening to a lot of different advice right now. Any thoughts you have for them going forward this fall?
Well, I hope that they just choose to be cohesive, to work together rather than getting into, and I know I have enough insight into the dynamics of the school board right now, that there's a lot of infighting, a lot of fighting at each other rather than figuring out a way to work together. It's absolutely essential. If I had it to do over again, I would have taken a very different stance than the stance that I took. I was elected very much, I ran on a very explicit gap closing, anti-racist orientation. And so I was unapologetic about that. I wouldn't compromise that, but I would figure out a way to be more collaborative and to figure out, what do my colleagues on the board, what do they need? And then figure out a way to work together to achieve our goals.
Great stuff. Dr. Blanford, I thank you for that. I want to look ahead in the future because we know it's going to be brighter ahead. It's in our next segment here. What's next? Stephan, we have tackled some pretty big issues today, and I really thank you for your candor. I very much appreciate it. I want to leave our listeners with a sense of hope if we can. We're emerging from a pandemic that has devastated our country, including institutions like schools and our early learning system too. What keeps you going? What gets you up on a Monday to say, I'm ready to tackle what's ahead? Some thoughts on that as we wrap up.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think it is a great opportunity for us to reimagine things and not to go back to the old way of doing business. Um, the meetings that I'm in now, people are bringing their best selves and their imaginations and their energy, and thinking a lot about thinking about a year ago when people were marching in the streets. A lot of the energy of that has dissipated, but the folks that I talk to are still energized by, we need to remake America. We need to think differently than we have thought in the past, and not just go back to the old way, because the old way wasn't working for too many of us. And so that's what brings me energy and passion every day, is knowing that there are other people out there who want to reimagine the way that we do business in Washington State and in the country.
Thank you so much for this, Dr. Stephan Blanford. I really appreciate you being on the show.
It was my pleasure. It's
All right.
always good to talk to you, Brian.
Back at you. Dr. Blanford is the executive director of the Children's Alliance. You can learn more about Stephan's work at children'salliance.org. Thank you also to our patrons. I should point out, anyone who's listening on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, you can always find out what's brewing in local politics here. So subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. Again, please do become a patron on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We really could use your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media 2. See you soon.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.